Good evening, everybody. This is Cadet Bruder, and I will be doing your SI for a 9-line Medevac request and missed reports. So to get started, we'll go over what a missed report is and what a TC3 card is, why we use them, and then we'll take that information and we'll transfer that into a 9-line Medevac request. We'll go over what exactly those are, what they look like, how to fill them out, and then how to call them in over the radio. So to start off with, we've got the missed report and the TC3 card. So this example here, you can see, is from the Appendix B of the Ranger Handbook. We're using the 2017 edition, which is the one that we have available through the battalion, and it's fairly easy to find. So if you wanted to get yourself a copy of that, you would have all of these quick reference cards in here. So to go through this TC3 card, this is what it would look like. You can see here it's the DD form 1380, and this is the front and the back side. So it has some demographic information here, and then pertinent information as to where the injury happened. So we'll go through the mechanism, which is the M of missed, and you can see those are highlighted here with the bold font. So mechanism is basically just how an injury happened. So in this particular example, John Doe had a gunshot wound. That was the mechanism. So then in this next section, injury, we have the person here, the model, to represent John Doe, and you can see that he has a cat tourniquet on his right leg, and the location of the gunshot wounds as noted here, GSW with the X encircled per the guidelines up here in the injury section. So down here we'll move into signs and symptoms. This is as the medic is keeping track of him, and you can see the different timestamps there, and then just some vital information as far as pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, responsiveness, and pain. So those are things that the medic will keep track of when you take a casualty. And then we go on to treatment. These are things that the medic has done already for the person before they are moved off-site. So again, we have a tourniquet on the extremity, as was marked on the injury section here, and it shows what type of tourniquet it was, and then also he has a pressure dressing. And then the airway is intact, and then breathing and circulation, those things are not as specific to this injury, so they're left off there. And then he was given medication, so pain relievers are noted here, and you also have the dose, how they're administered, and what time, and then other information. So he had a combat pill pack, and they were taking hypothermia prevention measures. And then the first responder here, and then the last four of the responder. That way they know who did what for this casualty. So that's the TC3 card, and then what you'll do is you'll take that information, and that gets put into a missed report. And you can see here, as we're moving into 9-line Medevac requests, this again is from Appendix B of the Ranger Handbook, and it is B5. This is a NATO 9-line Medevac request form with a missed report. So the 9-line Medevac request is, again, it's a NATO standard, so that way U.S. forces and their allies can have a common means of transmitting this information, make it faster, more fluid, more efficient. That way you can potentially save more lives with it. So then on the right here, this in particular is a close-up of a laminated shell that I have. It's slightly out of date because there are some changes in the brevity codes, which I'll go over. But this goes over line by line what each line of the 9-line is. So you can see we have location, radio information, number of patients, equipment, patients by type. So you'll give the patients by precedence, which basically just says what kind of priority they are, and then by type, we'll go into that when we go over the brevity codes. Security at the pickup site, method of marking, patient nationality and status, and then NBC contamination. So a few important things to note here: line 6 and line 9, those are different, as you can see, for peacetime and wartime. So for this particular example, we'll have a wartime situation, which we'll see later, and we'll go through how to fill that out for wartime. Otherwise, during peacetime, you can see here specific information about the wounds by type. So that's more of your missed information, and that's where this missed report here on this form comes into play. And then also with line 9, you have a terrain description. So if you are transmitting a 9-line potentially in a domestic situation, whether it's a natural disaster or something else, and you're not in combat, then that would be the format that you would use. So we'll go into brevity codes here. These are specific to certain lines. So with line 3, remember this was the patients by precedence. So we have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. These are all transmitted in the phonetic alphabet, just so that everything is a lot clearer over the radio. You have urgent, urgent surgical, priority, routine, and convenience. So this can change depending on what your TC3 guidelines are. When they taught it at basic camp for 2019, they had combined urgent and urgent surgical, and then routine and convenience. And that's just because routine and convenience are like, less severe injuries. They're not really 100% taking somebody out of the fight, but they should probably have medical attention. But there's not a big distinction between these two, so they combined those. And then as far as urgent and urgent surgical goes, if they're classified as urgent, they're probably going to need surgical care at some point anyways, so that's why they had combined urgent and surgical for us. So we'll just go based on that assumption for the example that we see later. So line 4, again, is special equipment. This would be different depending on the situation that you're in. So Alpha is none. That's going to be most of the time. Bravo would be hoist. So if you're, depending on your terrain, if you're in a relatively unreachable position where they can't get you out very well, then they would use a hoist to make that a little bit easier. Likewise with the extraction equipment, if you are in a vehicle, for example, they would need something to get you out of that vehicle. So like jaws of life is a common thing that we would see, at least on the civilian side. But that's kind of the idea behind that. And then a ventilator if you need that for your airway. So then line 5, this was the patients by type. So we've already gone over patients by precedence over here. By type, we have litter and ambulatory. So litter basically means that you can't move on your own. You need assistance, and ambulatory could be that you're a little more functional. You need less assistance moving around. So maybe it's an upper extremity injury and you can still walk. You can get yourself out of the situation by yourself. So then that takes a little bit less involvement from other people. So we have line 6. This is your security in the pickup site, remember, for wartime. So as far as peacetime, again, this is going to be your missed information, what the injury is, more specific details about that. So as far as the enemy goes, we have none, possible, enemy is in the area, and then enemies in the area, and you need an armed escort. So this one, the distinction between these two, this would be more of a approach with caution, whereas this one is that you need the area secured and you don't have the capability to do it on your own, so you need the armed escort to protect the casualties. So then we'll move on to line 7, and we have the different types of marking here. So a key note about line 7, you will transmit the brevity code to specify what your marking is, but say you have different colored panels or pyro or smoke, you're not actually going to transmit the color of that, and that is in case somebody is listening on the radio and they can intercept that and potentially attack your pickup site, and you don't want to have that happen. So what you'll do is you'll transmit the brevity code, and then the pickup crew is going to confirm the color with you, so they will get in contact over the radio and say, this is what I see. So we'll just say, for this instance, we'll use smoke. So the vehicle crew would say that they see green smoke, and that is the color that you had put out for your marking. So you'll confirm that, and then they'll know that that's the pickup site. However, if they say, we see green smoke, but your smoke is yellow, then you know that that's not the pickup site, and then you need to figure out another way to redirect them. So in line 8 is patient status and nationality. You can see here we have distinctions between military and citizen, as well as U.S. and non-U.S. And then EPW, because there are international laws regarding the treatment of prisoners of war, and so that when they need medical care, you would still include them on the 9-line Medevac request. That way you keep yourself out of hot water and make sure that you're being ethical in how you conduct warfare. So in line 9 for wartime, we have your CBRN threat, and that's pretty self-explanatory. You just use the acronym to specify what the threat is, and if there is none for your situation, then you would tend to leave that off of the request. So this is the scenario that we've come up with for writing out the 9-line Medevac request. And again, we're using John Doe, different John Doe this time. Private First Class Doe received a gunshot wound to the arm and to the upper leg. He cannot walk, but they're in a wooded area with a small clearing nearby. And they have high visibility panels, smoke grenades, and flares. They have broken contact, but they might still be in the area, and there is no known CBRN threat. So in order to create the 9-line Medevac request off of this situation, we'll go through it line by line in the following slides here. So this is our location. This is actually from an old map that I had of the land nav course from basic camp at Fort Knox. So our location is this one here, marked by the red arrow. That's where our grid coordinates will come from. So writing a 9-line Medevac request, I have it broken out here line by line, and this is handwritten, so you don't have to have a particular format for it, or a pre-printed form, as long as you know the information. But again, those do tend to help because it's a lot to memorize and just go off the top of your head, especially when you need to do this quickly. So we have line 1 is our location. So we have the grid coordinates here. These are the real grid coordinates of that particular point. So we have Echo Golf 8926 9154. So depending on how strict you are when you're being assessed with this, they might have you use the numbers specifically. So 9 would be Niner, 4 is more like Fower, and then 5 is Fife. So it just makes it a little more abrupt, a little more clear. That way that you can get these transmitted clearly and quickly. So we'll move on from that, and we'll do that as close to realistically as possible for this situation. So line 2 is your radio frequency and your call sign. So Cyclone 16, that is the platoon leader when you're calling up to a company level communications. 35000 is the frequency. Most frequencies are going to be 5 digits, and that's how you'll load it into the SINCAR radio, which when we are at FTX is typically what we'll have. We'll have an RTO for each platoon leader, and then they'll use that. So the RTO has to be able to input these. But this is the frequency of the radio at the pickup site. So whoever has the radio there, the RTO, this is the frequency that they can be reached on. This is the platoon leader's call sign. So, and this is the suffix that specifies that it's the platoon leader. So then, moving on from there, we have line 3, which was our patients by precedence. So we have Alpha 1, so we have one urgent patient for that line. And then line 4, we have Alpha. He doesn't need any special equipment, he just needs medical attention. So moving on to line 5, we have Lima 1 because he can't walk, so he's a litter patient. And then line 6, we'd said that they'd broken contact, but they could still be in the area, so they're possibly in the area, so we have line 6 is Papa. And then we have a break here, and that's because this stuff above the line is the information that they would need to get an evac vehicle out quickly. The rest of it can be transmitted en route, so that's why you want to get these out as fast as you can. So you'll get these done. Once they have those, then you'll say break, and then you'll move into line 7. So for line 7, we have Alpha, meaning that we're using panels for this situation because we're in a wooded area with a clearing. We don't want to use pyro or smoke because the woods can obscure that, but if we go to the clearing, smoke would be a little more viable, but we still don't want the pyro just because of the environmental factors. And then we go on further down to line 8. We have Alpha 1, so it is 1 U.S. military casualty. So again, that is the brevity code for U.S. military, and then you have the number. So you always give the brevity code first, and then the number following that. If you have more than one category, then you would give one of them. So say we had Alpha 1, but then we also had somebody who was a little bit less priority, and we'll just say that was a routine. For that example, we would use Delta or Charlie, depending on if you're using the condensed version or not, and then the number as well. So you would give this category Alpha 1, break, Charlie 1. So that just lets them know how many there are and then what priority they need, because if they have the priority, then they know how fast they have to get things up and running, and it makes it that much easier to get out there. So we'll go further on to line 9. In this situation, we didn't have a sea-burn threat, so when we read this off over the radio, we will leave this particular line out, and that way they know that there is no sea-burn threat, and we have that noted down here. So the completed 9-line Medevac request form is this, as we saw on the last slide. So when you go to read these out, typically what's going to happen is you're going to get on the radio and you're going to call to hire, and the general format for that is you, this is me. So in this case we'll use Alpha 6 if we are, say we're trying to call the company first sergeant. So for our example with our call sign, we're Cyclone 16, so it would be Alpha 6, this is Cyclone 16, 9-line Medevac to follow. So that lets you know that you're trying to reach them and you have a 9-line to give out. So then they'll get on and they'll say go ahead, and then you'll read this off. So to read it off, you would say line 1, Echo Golf 8, Niner 2, 6, Niner 1, 5, 4. Line 2, 3, 5, 0, 0, 0. Cyclone 16, line 3, Alpha 1, line 4, Alpha, line 5, Lima 1, line 6, Papa, break. And then you'll have a slight pause here and go to line 7, Alpha, line 8, Alpha 1. So that would finish your 9-line report. They'll ask you if they need to repeat any lines, and then you will sign off the radio and your Medevac would be inbound. So that wraps up how to do the 9-line, how to fill it out, how to write it. So some recommendations and resources for this. Get a laminated shell and keep that with you in your flick or in your PC. And that just something that you can have on hand as an aid for memory in case you have to do it really quickly and you can't quite remember everything off the top of your head. This particular Write in the Rain notebook has all of the references in the back. There are other useful ones like range cards and TLPs, things like that. So that's a good one to have. Plus you can note everything down on its pages, and you don't have to specifically go off of the shell. You can just write it out quick. It's good to have for that. Write in the rain reference cards, same kind of thing that's going to be in the back of this one. It just is those references. So if you have those and keep them on your person, then you'll always have that. Or you can get specific 9-line cards so that you have just that, and then you can use those to fill that out as you're going through your lanes. And then of course the Ranger Handbook, and we used everything from Appendix B that has other quick references in it as well. So that'll conclude the SI brief for missed reports and 9-line medevac requests. If you have any questions about that, you can take that up with your squad leaders, ask them for a little more information. You can come to me, myself, directly, and I'd be more than happy to help with that. So hopefully this gave you guys a good overview, and we will wrap it up here.